Welcome to the Introduction to Blender for Maya Users tutorial, Part 1, Interface. My name is Jerry. If you are a current Maya user, or even just someone getting started in 3D, this video is for you. Though it will be through the eyes of an experienced Maya user. After installing and launching Blender, we'll go through the main interface elements, what they do, and how they might relate to what you already know in Maya or another 3D package. The good news? Blender is easy to learn and get proficient at, especially for an existing 3D artist or animator. If you're watching this video, then you probably have heard of Blender and have an interest in getting to know more about it, especially if you are coming from a Maya background. Blender is a free and open source, robust, 3D modeling, animation and rendering software. If you haven't already, you can download and install Blender from blender.org for free. Who am I? I have been using Maya since its inception in early 1998 for film, broadcast, and tons of themed entertainment projects throughout the world. I am mostly a modeler, materials guy and a lighter, and also do a lot of compositing. My goal with this video is to help others, as others help me break into the Blender community. Before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. As with all software, there are many different ways to achieve an end goal, and many different ways one may go about working in the software they know and love. Especially if you are coming from Maya, you probably have some habits and certain ways you like things. Which is why I've made this short introduction series of videos. Once you've mastered the basic understanding of how Blender is set up, then you can go in and start tearing things up and rearranging the interface to make it your own. Let's get started. For this tutorial, I'll be using version 4.4. When you first launch Blender, you will be presented with a splash screen and a default general startup workspace with all the standard default menus and tools. Click your left mouse button anywhere away from the splash screen to close it. Before we go too far, I'm going to increase the resolution scale of the interface to make it easier to see and follow on smaller screens. I'll just go to the Edit menu and find the Preferences sub-menu. Then click on Interface on the left side, and under Resolution Scale, slide this up a bit to around 1.3. And then I'll close that Preferences window. The first thing you will notice is a cube, and a couple gizmos that represent a camera, a default light, and what's called a 3D cursor at the origin of the grid. These large window panels, which you do most of your work in, are called editor windows or editor types. Like Maya has a graph editor, a hypershade, or a 3D view panel which you can swap back and forth from. Blender is set up so instead of having multiple pop-up windows for things like a hypershade or UV editor, they are viewable in these editor windows. The default is the 3D viewport, shown here, in the upper left of any of these editor windows. And yes, you can have many open at the same time. You will see a drop-down menu. If you click on it, it will drop down and show you the available editor types you can replace the current one with. The editor window is made of everything within its borders. When you change the editor type, all the buttons and options for the window change. A quick example, if I click on that drop-down again and select Image Editor, we are now in the Image Editor. I'll switch this back to 3D Viewport for now. Across the top we have the standard File and Edit menu structure, along with some tabs, which will also bounce you into different editor types. We are currently on the Layout tab, so we see a pretty standard 3D layout area. We'll come back to the 3D editor last, and I'll explain some of the gizmos and buttons you see around the edges and along the top. First, let's move over to the upper right area, which Blender calls the outliner, which in Maya, we call the outliner as well. It's a listing of all the elements you have in your scene. These can be grouped, parented, and rearranged similar to the outliner in Maya. To quickly hide an object, in this case the cube, from the 3D layout editor, clicking on the little eye hides it from view. Click it again, and it comes back. The camera next to the eye indicates whether something will be visible in the render. If you click the camera to turn it off, it will still be visible in the 3D editor, but will not appear when you go to render your scene. Collections, while they look like groups, function a bit differently. They function as a visual organizer instead of a group. They don't show up in the 3D view like groups do, and you can't manipulate them in the editor. What is nice about collections, which we will explore more in a later video, is the ability to turn them off completely. Blender will ignore anything within this collection. Also, collections are a clever way to sort elements in the scene for rendering out layers or channels for compositing later. To add a new collection, you can go to the little plus button in the upper right and click on it, and new one appears in the list. To rename the collection, double-click on it and rename. To move something from one collection into another, left-click drag it over the top of the collection you want to move it to. You will notice it turns black. Release, and the object has been moved to this collection. Notice that the new collection is at the same hierarchy as the original collection. If you don't have another collection selected, Blender assumes you want that new collection at the root of the scene. If however you had the original collection selected like this, then when to add a new one, it would add it within that collection like a child. To move it to the root, simply left-click drag it over the scene collection, and it's back at the same level as the others. To delete a collection, select the collection you want to delete, and press the delete key on your keyboard. Any elements inside of that collection now fall back into the hierarchy where the collection was. You can easily click and drag the item back into the default collection. Before moving on, I have a quick ask. If you enjoy this video, please tap the like button and subscribe to our channel to get notified when new videos are posted. Below the outliner on the right side of the interface is the Properties Editor, which I would most associate with the Attributes Editor in Maya. As you can see by what it looks like, this is where you will be editing properties. The main section is Selective Sensitive. Because we left off clicking on things in the outliner, it populates with the properties of what we have selected. So if I select the light in the outliner, it changes, and if I select the camera, it changes again to reflect the properties of that object. Along the left side of the Properties Editor are several icons. These are also selected sensitive. You may have noticed, as we change selected objects, some of the icons change their symbol, and sometimes new ones will appear. As this is an introduction video to get you acquainted with the interface, I won't go over what all these do in detail, but give you a quick rundown of what they are, so you have an idea. The first one we will look at is the Render Properties. In Maya, this is equivalent to the Render Settings pop-up window. Here you set your type of render engine, and depending on which render engine you select, the properties below will change just like Maya. Next one down is the Output icon. In Maya, the render and output are all in the same interface. In Blender, the Output Properties is where you put the resolution, aspect ratio, start and end frames, and then set the file format and the path for the frame outputs. Next is the View Layer icon. This is similar to setting up render passes and what you want to have render or not. Next down is the Scene Properties, which control the global settings for the current scene. In Maya, this would be similar to the Settings then Preferences pop-up. Here you can set your scene units and global properties that affect simulations, lighting, animation, etc. The next one down looks like a little globe, and it is called World Properties. Here you can quickly set the color of the background, much like you would change the color of the environment background color of your camera in Maya in the Attributes Editor. I'll just quickly run through the rest of these by name. You have a Collections icon and Object Properties tab, which as you saw before, changes the list of properties on the right depending on what you have selected. Next is the Modifier icon. I won't go into too much about modifiers here, but many of the deformers or modeling tools you would find in the Deform or Animation tabs in Maya can be found here. Clicking Add Modifier brings up a whole slew of possible ways to modify or reshape whatever you have selected. These modifiers, like in 3D Max, are stackable and rearrangeable, which can yield different end results depending on their order. Next is Particles, then Physics, Constraints, then Data Properties, which again, change depending on what you have selected. Notice too, the little icon changes to reflect what you have selected, and matches the little icons in the outliner as well. And finally, for the purpose of this video, is the Material Properties panel, where you can create, edit, and assign materials to object in the scene, as well as inspect properties at quick glance. Much more detailed editing of materials is done in a node-based shader editor, kind of similar to the Hypershade in Maya, which we will be giving an introduction to in a later video. Across the bottom of the default interface is yet another editor. It looks like it's part of the 3D editor, but it's considered an editor itself. This one is called the timeline. You can resize editors at any time by hovering your mouse over the border of two of them, and then left-clicking and dragging to make larger or smaller. Same with stacked editors. And same with the timeline editor at the bottom. Hover over the black line at the bottom of the 3D editor just above the play buttons. Your cursor will change to a two-sided arrow. Left-click and drag up to enlarge the timeline editor a bit. This is pretty much the same as the timeline under the default Maya interface. You can click and drag the timeline just like Maya, and see keyframes for objects which have animation applied to them. Finally, we get to the 3D editor, saving the best for last. This is clearly where you will spend the majority of your time navigating and transforming objects, cameras, and lights. We already talked about the upper left editor type drop-down menu. Next to that, we have the Object Interaction Mode drop-down. The default is Object Mode. This is where you move, scale, and rotate objects in your scene, and get it ready for rendering through a camera after setting up the lights and materials just like a Maya Perspective View panel. Clicking on the Object Mode drop-down menu reveals several more interaction modes. The one that you will spend the majority of your time in apart from the Object Mode is the Edit Mode. This would be equivalent to setting your menus in Maya to modeling. Click on Edit Mode. Notice a few things have changed. We are still in our 3D viewport, but we now have additional buttons to our left, and the cube has turned orange and is highlighting its faces, edges, and vertices. I won't go into too much now, but this is where you will do your modeling such as bevels, extrusions, adding edge loops, moving vertices and edges, and so on. We won't go over what all the tools on the left side do. We will cover this in an upcoming introduction to modeling in Blender for Maya users. I just wanted to show you what happens if you change this mode. In the modeling introduction video, we'll dive into many of these modeling tools, and how they compare with what you may already know of in Maya. However, I will give you a sneak peek. If you hover your mouse cursor over one of the tools, the tooltip will give you its name. Better yet, when starting out, if you hover over the edge of the toolbar row, you will get a two-sided arrow again. Left-click and drag this to the right and release. When starting out, it's helpful to have the names associated with the icons. I think this is a nice touch. For now, let's click back on the Edit Mode drop-down and go back to Object Mode. Back in Object Mode, notice the tools on the left retain their names. You can leave them as is, or minimize them by hovering over the edge, and when the double arrow shows up, left-click drag to the left to collapse. I'll quickly go through the 4 sub-menu drop-downs in the 3D editor. First, we have the View menu. It pretty much says what it does. Lets you set viewing preferences, collapse certain interface elements, as well as control what you are looking at. Next is the Select menu. Again, pretty self-explanatory. The Add menu is equivalent to the Create menu in Maya. This is where you add primitives, lights, cameras, locators, and so on into your scene. Next is the Object menu, and this functions similar to the Modify menu in Maya, and is selection dependent. Select an object, go up to the Object menu, and you can do things like change the pivot point, move the object in 3D, duplicate, etc. Across the top in the middle of the 3D editor are a couple drop-downs. First is the Pivot or Origin drop-down. This is equivalent to Axis Orientation in the Tool Settings pop-up in Maya. Do you want to rotate your object in World Orientation, or in Local or Object Orientation? We will explore this in detail in an upcoming introduction to Manipulating Objects video. The next icon looks like a chain link. It is a quick way to set or reset the pivot/orientation location of your object. Kinda like what the Center Pivot command does, but you can also recenter your pivot onto other elements, which we will go into in a future video. Next, there is a little magnet icon. And you may have guessed, this is the quick way to get to some snapping options. Clicking on it turns snapping on. Then the button immediately next to it with the drop-down symbol sets what you want to snap to. Left-click, and we can see we have plenty of ways to snap objects to each other or the grid. Next to that is a button with a little dot with a circle around it. This is the Proportional Editing Object mode. Think of this as the soft select in Maya. When you have a vertex selected in Edit mode, and turn this on, you can adjust the fall off of the strength of the transform on that vertex, edge, face, or object and its effect on nearby elements. We will hit on this a little in the intro to modeling in Blender video mentioned previously. Then across the top on the right we have a few interface buttons to give us quick access to things like selectability and visibility, which is like the show drop-down menu in a Maya panel. You can show or hide individual types of elements like curves, or hide or show lights, etc. Clicking on the little arrow icon will turn off the ability to select particular element types. So if I turn off the arrow next to the mesh, I will no longer be able to select a mesh in that viewport. Let's turn that back on. And now I can select it with a left click once again. The next one over is a quick way to hide or edit the gizmos in the upper right corner and transform manipulators in the editor. Turning this off will hide the gizmos, or you can turn them on and off one at a time. Next is the Show Overlays button. Clicking on it will hide the grid, any cameras, lights, etc., basically anything that isn't an actual mesh in the scene. The next 5 buttons are view mode toggles. These are similar to Maya's shading sub-menu within the panel's menu. You will notice the middle white circle one is highlighted. This is the default material gray look like you would have in Maya, and is called solid shading. Going left to right, the first one is X-ray mode. This turns the objects in the scene to X-ray mode. Next is wireframe. Notice that the X-ray stayed on. This is default behavior, but if you click on the X-ray button it turns off, and wireframe remains. Now if you click on the middle circle again, the solid mode, you will be back to where we started from. Now click on wireframe icon once again. Notice that the X-ray is still turned off. That is because we turned it off, and it's respecting that choice. If however we turn X-ray back on, and then toggle between solid mode and wireframe, notice now the X-ray is back on. Think of X-ray like a toggle that once it's on or off, you will need to click it to change its state again in wireframe mode. The next one over is called the Material Preview. In Maya, this would be similar to pressing 6 on your keyboard to get shaded display with texture maps. And finally clicking on the 5th little icon will give you the rendered mode. I equate this to an IPR rendering mode where lights, shadows, textures, reflections, and effects are shown using your currently selected renderer from the render properties on the right, allowing you to see pretty quickly what your scene looks like without having to go through the render output setup. After modeling and setting up my scene, I find myself in this mode almost exclusively. The quality and performance settings for this view type are found in the Render Properties section. The colorful gizmo in the upper right corner is a manual navigation gizmo, similar to what they have in 3D Max. The use of this is explained in detail in the intro to navigating in Blender video. Below that, we have 4 little icons. The first 2 are navigation aids. By left-clicking on these you can zoom and pan, and then we have a camera button. A left click on that camera will show you the camera view. Go ahead and click on it to see what the camera sees. And click it again to go back to where you were. The bottom grid-looking icon toggles the view between perspective and orthographic. One last hidden panel to look at, and then we can wrap up the intro to the 3D Editor interface. While in the 3D viewport, press the N key on the keyboard. A side panel will open up from the right side. If you aren't seeing this, make sure your mouse is inside the 3D Editor and click on the background somewhere, and then click the N key again. The panel has 3 default tabs along the right side called Item, Tool, and View. The Item tab gives you transform information about the object selected. The Tool tab panel is similar to a mini tool settings pop-up in Maya and is transform tool dependent. Click on the View tab. This brings up information about the camera and other elements in the scene. Any additional tabs shown are what Blender calls add-ons or plugins in Maya. Pressing N key again will close this panel. Quick note about shortcuts like that. Blender is very good at making shortcuts universal regardless of what editor you are in. In the 3D editor, it brings up just what you saw, but in the graph editor or the shading editor, pressing N brings out a context-sensitive panel just like the one we just saw, so you always know that N will bring up additional resources for you to have quick access to in just about any editor. I want to go back to the tabs along the top of the interface for just a moment to give you a quick glance. Blender has some very powerful built-in tools which rival other dedicated niche software. Some of these include an entire sculpting section similar to Mudbox or ZBrush. Of course, it has a robust UV editor, an internal built-in texture painter, a shading editor, which is a version of the Hypershade node-based materials editor in Maya, a complete animation editor and graph editor, as well as Doke Sheet. Blender even has its own node-based compositor to tweak your renders before outputting full-length, full-resolution animations. There is a pretty amazing node-based section called Geometry Nodes for modifying the geometry of an object with node-based operations much like Maya's mesh. And if you are into Python, there is a scripting editor as well. You will notice on the outliner, the properties and the timeline sections. They all have a little button in the upper left corner, just like the 3D viewport. Clicking on these will bring up the editor type drop-down once again. So you see, our current setup has 4 editors displayed. Adding another editor. Let's say you want to have 2 views or even 4 views within the 3D editor like Maya or 3D Max. Hover over the border between the 3D viewport and the outliner. When the 2-sided arrow icon appears, right-click. This brings up a small menu with some options. Click Vertical Split, then move your mouse to the left into the 3D viewport. Notice a new border line shows up. Move it to where you want it, and left-click to place. You can then left-click this editor border to resize like the rest. You can add as many editors as you need by right-clicking selecting the vertical or horizontal options, and then moving your mouse up or down, and then left-clicking. Now, to get rid of the extra editors, is the same exercise. Right-click on a border you want to dissolve. The same menu comes up. You can either continue to subdivide the editor windows, you can swap the editors from left to right or top to bottom. Or you will notice there is a Join Right button which will make the left window take over the right completely. And same with the Join Left button, which will make the right side take over the area of the two. I'll quickly navigate around so you can see the difference when we join the editors together. Then I'll right-click on the border, select Join Left, and the right side editor takes over. We'll be exploring navigating the 3D editor in the next video, which is probably the one video that you will get the most out of because of the amount of time we all spend navigating around as we work. Let me clear the rest of these editors real quick. That about wraps this up. Thanks so much for watching and getting this far. Remember, this was just an introduction video. There are an unlimited amount of resources out there to help you learn and get up to speed using Blender, including more videos from yours truly. Please look for part 2 of this series introduction to navigating in Blender for Maya users. Again, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Also, please leave a note in the comments with any questions or things I could have done differently. Check out other videos on my YouTube channel. Links are in the description. Best wishes to you. Now go create.